Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Kodiak Shack podcast. Today we have English Sall with us from Cymantix, but first we're going to knock out the admin. So thank you everybody for listening to the podcast. Like, share, subscribe, tell your friends about the podcast, and follow us on LinkedIn and Instagram, where we post a lot of our clips. We're also on YouTube, so if you want to see the people who are talking, feel free to follow us on YouTube and check out our episodes there. Donations are always open, so feel free to go to the link in your episode wherever you listen, and you can click that and then donate to the show. Just helps us keep producing these awesome episodes. So English, thank you for being here today. We appreciate you taking the time. Tell us about yourself. It's not a trap.
Awesome. Thanks, Vader. Thanks so much for having me. So I'm English Sall. I am currently wearing the hat as co-founder and CEO of my company Cymantix, which is spelled funny with a C and a Y and an X. My background, it's, a little bit more diverse, than specifically what I'm doing now. I have a background, I have a PhD in industrial and organizational psychology, which is really surrounding kind of the science of work, and thinking about how do people fit into work systems and the workforce, and just sort of thinking through organizational development and workforce development in that regard. And I spent most of my previous career actually in global health and global development, just working on sort of organizational development and systems, developing systems in that vein.
Nice. And how does that transfer kind of what you previously did and then kind of starting this company? We talked previously before the episode on how you kind of started the company, but what was that progression of your previous life to now starting Cymantix?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's one of those things where I, in full transparency, never sort of sat and thought, oh, I'm going to start a company. I'm going to go start a tech company and be the CEO. And it was a really wonderful happenstance that I was at a point in my life where I was getting a postdoc. I was doing a postdoc at UNC here in North Carolina, and really just kind of stumbled into this lab and met this great guy who was working on some really cool tech. And the tech is the center point of our company. Really it's kind of at a high level, it's a visual search engine. And it has the ability to aggregate all this different types of data coming from different places, all into one place. And it then provides a really unique visual user interface that allows the user to explore and interact with that information and make meaning out of it. And for me, seeing that, especially from my previous career, so much of what I used to do was try and map systems and try and map people and try and map information to say, hey, this node over here influences this node over here, or this entity influences this entity, or let me build out this ecosystem to understand the complexity of the problem that I'm trying to solve. And in so many ways, what I was seeing visually to what Michael, my co-founder, had created was this ability to do this in real time with all this, disparate information that usually the user has to sort of go over here and dig into this information and go over here and dig into this information. And having that all in one place, I was just sitting there when I was, seeing this tech for the first time, and I was like, wow, that would have saved me so much time. It would have saved me so much energy. And I would have felt more confident in so many of the decisions that I had to make. And so I kind of became a huge fangirl of that technology and participated in all of his sort of development studies. And then finally just put him on the spot one day, and I was like, what do you want to do with this tech? Like, this is so cool. You could really shake some things up with this. And he's like, I don't know, maybe one day I'm going to start a company, but we'll see. And I'm just a very type A personality, and I've, had a lot of coffee that morning. So I was like, great, let's do it. I'm ready. So somehow convinced him to come on this crazy ride with me.
Well, that's awesome. And how do you, I mean, it, most of the time you don't think about it as a kid. You're like, hey, get into the study of work, or, the systems of things and how things connect. So how did you find your way into kind of getting your PhD there initially?
Yeah. So I originally, when I was an undergrad, I had a really hard time deciding what I wanted to study. And that's just sort of been my my MO for so long. I find so many things fascinating. And I went from studying international studies to economics to communications to English to dance. Like, I was just all over the place. It ended up getting like, 3 dual degrees and 3 minors, and everyone was like, what are you even going to do? And I realized sort of through that experience that, like, there's so many parts of these disciplines that I think are so fascinating and so interesting. But really, the parts that I love were the systems components. How does this system work? How do people fit into this system? How do we build things and do things that people want to be a part of? And so I think for me, I really didn't even know that industrial and organizational psychology existed until I kind of just tripped into an internship after I graduated college. And it was for the science of work. And I thought that it hit so many of these elements that I loved about economics, that I loved about sociology, that I loved about psychology, and that I loved about statistics. And it was like all of these combined parts of, like, how do you think about ecosystems? How do you think about complex problems? How do people think about complex problems? And so from there, I just sort of kind of went down that path, and it's a fascinating discipline that, in my mind, I don't necessarily, I'm not at a company sort of building selection processes or a lot of the more sort of normalized routes that maybe my colleagues would have gone down. But it's a wonderful tool to have in my toolbox to understand the theories and principles of, so that, I can solve complex problems. And it's ironically quite good training for being the CEO of a company. So it comes in handy sometimes.
Well, and Bender, I'll let you fire off a question here in a second if you got one. But one more is, what are some of the trends or common errors that you see consistently across, like you said, with companies or with just general work or processes, that you're like, man, these are pinch points that so many companies or people or just organizations run into?
It's a really good question. And I think that I can, just speaking from myself and what I've witnessed, and even, mistakes that I've made, I think it's like, it sits at 2 ends of the spectrum, where either, especially as a small company, maybe you try to do too much too fast. And I think that that's a not necessarily like a failing of a company, but I think it is so hard when you're that young. I just remember, when it was just Michael and I, and there's so many things that you can do. And then really narrowing that scope of, like, but what should we do? What should be, where should the bounds be in, how we hire, how we grow, what our customers are, what does our VC investment look like? So I think learning very quickly to bound yourself when necessary, that's a hard lesson. And then I think on the other end, you sort of can look at companies who are just skyrocketing in growth. And that's so exciting and that's so wonderful. And then, but it's also like, that's the moment where you really have to walk and chew gum, right? You have to do so much at once. And that can also be really hard. So making sure that you are bringing people on who are not intimidated by that ambiguity, or intimidated by the fact that it's like, one day I have to code, the next day I have to demo, and the next day I have to take out the trash, right? So like how do
Yeah.
you make sure you're hiring for like kind of those people who can really help you in that moment from startup to scale up, to look across the company and say, what does this situation need? What needs to be done? And then those people who are fully capable to do it. So I think it's kind of, depending on where you are in your company's evolution, there's always, kind of these just very interesting nuances that you got to look out for. So still very much in the learning mode for myself, even on that though.
Yeah. Well, and I think, probably always learning, in that way, and kind of as you progress into new areas. Bender, what do you got?
Yeah, tell me or tell us a little bit. How did Cymantix kind of get linked up with the DoD? How did that bridge get built?
Yeah, so we, originally the technology that Michael developed really was surrounding the use case of healthcare. So we really kind of set out and thought, oh, we're going to go build tools to help healthcare providers and healthcare decision makers make better decisions and have information at their fingertips. And so we were kind of on that path. And then honestly, just sort of, there was one day out of left field where we were able to sort of kind of have interest came from, from the DoD, from that sort of space. And they said, hey, we like your tool. It's very cool. But can you do it on this kind of data? So it was very much a collaborative, exploratory process of can this tool add value to this space? And then from there, especially getting just a lot of user feedback and insight, we were able to really sort of kind of move more in that direction and say, oh, actually this tool, like we're really adding value here and getting a lot of good customer integration. And so we just sort of, we're now running hard down that track.
Cool. And is the DoD use case also kind of in healthcare, or is it what other?
Yeah, it's not actually in healthcare. It's a lot more kind of the higher level problem that originally we did set out to solve. And it's a problem, it's interesting because it's a problem that just is so industry agnostic, which is there's just so much information. There is so much unstructured and semi-structured information, and we don't have as many tools as we should to bring all of that information into one place, triage it, aggregate it, and then put some back-end analytics on it just to be able to understand it, just to be able to get a picture of what does this mean? Our current search algorithms present things to us in a very linear way, and that works for a lot of things. But it doesn't always work when you're trying to investigate or you're trying to explore something that is very nuanced, and you have things that are, when you're talking about domain specific information, you really want to be able to treat it, like you're exploring in the same way that you're trying to use a map or a compass to navigate yourself through the woods. We want to provide that as you navigate through the sea of information. And so that's really a lot of the problems that we're sort of going after within the DoD.
Well, and one of the things,
Nice.
looking on the website, I saw, I'm going to say terms or names, and I don't know what they mean. So please explain this to all of us. But Shannon and Ruthie, is that correct?
Yes.
The programs, the processes that you use. So what are both of those, and how do you see them applied either currently or in the future in the defense space?
Yeah, absolutely. So Shannon and Ruthie are the names of the products, and we have to give our products specific names, just as we're working on them internally.
Yeah.
And they are, some of them are named after very, influential people, a lot of women. So Shannon is actually named after a man, but Claude Shannon, who people would consider the father of information retrieval. But anyway, so Shannon is actually, it's a video meeting platform, and we sort of created it in a way because we just were tired of taking notes in our own meetings. But what it has led to is that it's a capturing mechanism. So what we're able to do with Shannon is that we use it for all of our internal meetings, some of our external meetings, and we're just capturing meeting notes. And then we're able to take that and it immediately sends to Patty or Ruthie. You might not see Patty on the website, but Ruthie and Patty are sort of the same side of a coin, or two different sides of a coin. But it's which is the visual search engine that I was telling you about. So you're automatically able to capture your meetings, capture any type of audio, send it to the library, and then search it in a really visual way. And the cool thing is too is that not only do you have that direct audio stream going, but you can then start to plug in really any other data source that you want. So be it an external database, news, PubMed, or be it your own internal records, you just sort of plug that into the system, and you can start to begin to search and navigate and make meaning out of these multiple kind of feeds of information in one highly visual and interactive space.
So now I have a lot of ideas here, because when I hear you start saying like, hey, you have all this data capture and now we can take audio from different sources or information, and then it can now kind of scour that. So does this information have to go in well defined? Like, does it have to have a lot of, kind of garbage in, garbage out? Or can you just kind of like, hey, all the, crumpled papers in my backpack, I now can utilize effectively because I just put it in here, and then it will kind of smooth it out, all those rough lines?
Yeah, so it's interesting, and this is and I will phrase this with saying that, like, I wish my co-founder Michael was here because he has a much better, more technical explanation for this, but I'm going to do my best. It's an interesting kind of problem that everyone in the information retrieval space kind of faces, or the search space. So you have the ability to do things. So for us, with our technology, one of the things that's really important to our users is real time. So they want to see on, right there in the moment. I want to see like the, open source intel that's out there. I want to see it in this platform, and I want to be able to do it quickly. And so there's this trade-off between sort of the messiness of real time versus the cleanness of sort of back-end analytics, and how do you really slice and dice this to make sure it's only the good stuff is coming in. But what we found is that with the search engine itself, with the clustering, the visual clustering program, Ruthie, it's the human in the loop element is really important. And so what we found is that you're able to bring sort of the more messy stuff into the user interface. And as long as the human has a sense of, this is what I'm looking at, this is what I'm looking for, and is really sort of focusing on that sort of domain specific information, the human in the loop component actually is really good, because what we're really trying to do is say, now it's all in one place. You don't have to spend time aggregating it and triaging it and capturing it. We did that for you. And now there's almost a very sort of easy way of exploration, and you can start to hone in on getting, to the signal from the noise faster. And so that's really our goal, is that we want to make this faster, and we want you to do it with more confidence. And so I don't know if that really answered your question, but
No, I think it does, because my imagine is it's kind of all this information is floating there, and then whether keywords or topics or trends, now it can kind of collate, if you will, kind of stack the stuff that's more applicable at the top of the list, the first things you'll see, or the more visually apparent. And then you can now make the decision of like, hey, that is the information I'm looking for. This other stuff is the chaff. I don't need it, kind of thing. Is
exactly.
am I understand? Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Bender, what do you got on that stuff?
Yeah, I think, I mean, the more you work with the DoD, you won't be surprised to know that, 99.9% of all valuable information is just lost, either on useless computers or whatever networks and stuff that we just can't access very well, or we just don't have time. So something like this, when I am thinking through it, I fly F-35s out at Hill, and the F-35 is really good at capturing all this information from the jet, everything that it sees, everything that it kind of processes. and we only skim a tiny bit off the top as far as the information that pilots then use in our debriefs. But it would be so helpful if there was a way, like you're kind of saying, that over, if we do one phase of a specific mission set for a month, if that back end, like something that like you guys are working on, can then glean all the pictures, or I guess the videos of the site pictures that we're looking for, or the what it would look like on our displays if you see the thing that we're training for. Anyway, if we could file all that, if we could gather all that, and then in an easy way, we can just access it real quick and bring it up in our briefs or whatever, then we can actually incorporate the lessons learned that we've been learning for a month. But right now, that it's just kind of getting lost in the data, the giant data. So there's definitely a use case, at least in my limited kind of realm in the F-35. But this kind of stuff it's exciting to hear about, and it's the hard part, I think, is bridging that gap between the capability that you have with the technology and guys like Vader and I, who we know what we want, but we have no idea how to like say it, or even know how to connect those two pieces. So it's kind of
Yeah.
exciting to hear that.
When
No,
I think one
totally.
of the go
No,
ahead,
go ahead,
English.
Vader.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say one of the things that's tough, and we've said this many times, is that everything in the DoD is stovepiped. Everything is kind of lives in its own little space, where the F-35, all the data that it gathers lives, if they even save it, lives on their network. And then some other platform that may have data lives on their network. And if we could just get all of that information to live in one space, so whether it's emissions from some adversary, something or other, whether it's some operators, task force type people working in some country that need all of this data, if it all lived in one place, now it's kind of it's that synergy, maybe the sum of all those parts is going to be way more useful than all of them being singularly analyzed. Is that accurate? Would you agree?
I totally agree. And I think, the thing is, too, is that I think what's hard in particular about this situation, I don't think it's unique to the DoD. We see it, elsewhere in other spaces as well. But having all the information live in one place, like, we have to really define what is the one place, right? Because, when you start, especially when you're talking about defense, you're talking about there's different networks, there's different classification levels, like there's all of these things. And so the question then becomes, should it live in one place, or can it have the ability to get pulled to one place, right? Where it sort of stays where it is, but then depending on credentialing, can people sort of access it? And is there a more sort of normalized or sort of consistent access ability? But also, like, the truth is, too, and this is just me with my psychologist hat on, but getting people to use new tools is hard. Like, it's just difficult, right? And even if it could be like the coolest, shiniest, like most gamified, awesome tool, there is still going to be a distance between when that tool is implemented to when the user can actually start using it to the highest value, right? And so for me, I think what's really interesting about being in this space is that so much of the kind of barriers or opportunities, I guess, also don't land necessarily in sort of the tech development part. Like, that part is great, and there's just so much cool, unique tech out there today. Like, we've got some cool stuff, but there's a lot of people who have a lot of cool stuff. But I think overcoming the state of inertia in from the DoD to other industries, of just sort of saying, what's going to get us over that hill of the user wanting to use this, right? There's so much power in like small daily habits of using tools. How do we get from this being like the new thing that like we're just adjusting to, or we're trying to make use of, to like, this is just habitual for you. You just go in and you just do, like, you know what I mean? Google has done it. Whenever you're like, what, I need something answered, I'm going to go to Google. So many social media platforms have done it. But I think we're still trying to, really paint that picture a little bit, especially in this space, when it comes to trying to build tools that are based on machine learning and AI, and like how do you then make that habitual? How do you make that tool really something that's ingrained in the workflow? So yeah, really interesting time.
When I think, because my understanding is you didn't have a ton of exposure to kind of the military in general and military members. So both kind of in the same vein is one, like how has it been interacting with military members, current and previous, people like Emma? And then two, like what are some of the things that you and those military members get excited about when you look at the future capability of what Cymantix brings?
It's a great question. So, for me, my previous career was a lot more in global health and global development. So I don't think I realized this in the beginning, but there are so many parallels, I think, between the space of defense and also just sort of global health and development. And I think a lot of it is sort of, working with big organizations like WHO or UNICEF or like sort of large, NGOs. There's still a lot of those same kind of just very, human type problems or human type barriers that we have to wrap our arms around. It's just a lot of it is resistance to change. How do you, and I wouldn't even say resistance, but it's just sort of like, it's all innate in all of us. Like we get used to using one thing, and it takes a lot of cognitive load and cognitive work to switch over and get used to another thing. And so I think there's some similarities in there of just sort of steering, steering big tanker ships into like pivoting a little bit. It just takes so much communication, and it takes a lot of desire and passion. And I think that it's been wonderful working with our partners within the DoD, because we've been lucky enough that the people that we're working with are like, we actually want to imagine the art of the possible with you, because we need to, because our work can be better with what capabilities we can bring to the table. And if our work is better, our team's work is better, and then our group's work is better, and then our organization's work is better. And so I see a lot of just raw collaborative spirit, which is just really cool. And it's really great to be a part of, especially as someone not coming from this space. You can imagine when, this tiny little lady is like walking into, meetings with Space Force, and they're like, what? But I've never, it's just, it's such a wonderful environment to just push through to solve problems with. And I just really appreciate that determination so much, because that's not everywhere.
Well, I think the gravity of the problem is probably paralleled well in the medical field as well as in the military, because both people, they're things that are life and death. There, Bender, I'll let you ask the last question because we're running out of time. What do you got before we let English go?
Well, that was kind of a positive note, so I don't feel like I shouldn't go out on a. I was gonna say, like, what are the biggest obstacles you've kind of encountered working with the military? So you can answer that, and then maybe add, something happy at the end there.
Yeah.
I think that the biggest obstacles, really, it's on myself and my team, and that the learning to understand. And, to me, and I felt this also when I first started, in the work with global development. There's a soup full of acronyms. There's paperwork that I don't even know how to read. And so the learning curve has been steep. In just like, what does this mean? I'll be in these conversations sometimes, and they'll be like, well, in the AOC for the DOD and the SEC, and I'm just like, can you guys just repeat those in words? So
Yeah.
it's but it's it's more of like myself and my team. Like the more we're exposed to it and the more we're in it, the easier it gets, right? So I would say it's probably been the biggest obstacle is just having to like write down all the acronyms to go back and Google.
Yeah. Well, and the worst part is sometimes we duplicate acronyms, like ATO, authority to operate, or air tasking order, depends on the day. So good luck building software that can figure all that out.
Right.
Well, great. Well, English, I know you have a hard out to get to other stuff, but we really do appreciate you taking the time. And, we'd love to have you back on in the future just to hear all the awesome progress that you and your team have. So thank you very much for being here with us.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Really appreciate it. And of course, yeah, I'd love to come back anytime, and I'll bring Michael with me next time.
Oh, that'd
Yeah,
be great.
we'll grill them.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Thank you for listening to the Kodiak Shack. Remember, like, share, subscribe. Thank you, everybody who has donated, and donations are always open. And remember, info@kodiakshack.com, and I'll have English's contact info and the website in the show notes so you can reach out to them. Thanks. Bye.